So if you can, do you want to give a little thumbs up? That might be helpful. Oh, perfect. Okay, wonderful. So yeah, I'm Vic Strecher, and I'm a professor at the University of Michigan in the School of Public Health and School of Medicine. And I was asked to speak a bit about how to move things from the research laboratory into the real world and some of the issues that come up during that time. And I'll talk maybe for, I'm not quite sure, maybe 20 minutes or so, maybe a little longer than that. Really happy to answer any questions as well. And thank you. I'm already getting this cool feedback from various people, so thank you. Just to give a little bit of my background though, I'm a behavioral scientist and I have some background in software engineering and an undergraduate degree in math and science. And I really did not think about the importance of the behavioral sciences until I started working in an organization in biostatistics that was a community health center. And I started realizing how many people die early or get very sick because of their lifestyle behaviors. So I started in my graduate school career getting a Master of Public Health degree and then finally a PhD in the area of public health and behavioral science to learn more about how people might be able to make changes in their lives. And while at that time, this is in the 1970s, people were using pamphlets for, people or other mass media programs, I realized how weak those kinds of programs were. And I started at an early time, well before the internet, thinking about software algorithms that might be able to tailor information to people's specific needs. So I created a laboratory. We ended up getting a lot of research money to start looking at how to tailor information to people's needs. So for example, if I'm a cigarette smoker and I wanted to quit smoking, a counselor, a therapist might ask, well, why do you want to quit in the first place? And you might say, for my health or for my family, set a good example, to have more energy, whatever that is. But also I might ask, what's holding you back? If I'm a therapist, and that smoker might say, well, I'm worried about gaining weight, or I'm worried about all the stress from not smoking, or I think I'm addicted. And you could build a software algorithm pretty easily, frankly, that would start identifying the right kinds of answers based on answers to different questions you might ask. And so that algorithm can turn into an expert system. And what I then did was we started building a lot of these algorithms and testing them against just mass media programs. And we found that we could double or triple the effect on smoking cessation or dieting, if you wanted to change your diet, if you wanted to get a mammogram, whatever those outcomes were that were related to decisions we make, behavioral decisions, we were starting to get very good at that and much better than mass media. Almost to the point of talking to a human counselor. And now this is back in the 1980s. And there were no computers at that time that could be reaching people, but we thought in our laboratory, there will be this thing called the internet, and we'll be able to reach people. And so after a while, as the internet was just starting, I offered all of these algorithms we were building. And by the way, we had at that time over $20 million in grant-funded research from our National Institute of Health in the United States. And we had a lot of really strong software algorithms that would help people make changes in their lives, in their lifestyle behaviors, to manage diseases such as hypertension or diabetes, to quit smoking, to manage their weight, to manage stress. And so we offered all of those algorithms for free to the Centers for Disease Control in the United States. And the Centers for Disease Control said, I know there's this thing, we know there's this thing called the internet, but people will not use the internet for their health. So Vic, what you're building are really science fair projects. What you're building are really nice projects, maybe for your own good or maybe to publish papers, but there's not really we don't see a real specific use at the Centers for Disease Control for these programs. And of course, being in public health, that was very depressing because the Centers for Disease Control was my way of disseminating what I did. And I actually had this existential experience. And this is something I'd like you to think about too. I started thinking about what might be on my headstone when I died. What would be on my gravestone? And I started realizing that on my gravestone, very likely my epitaph would talk about the number of journal articles in scientific journals that I had published, or how much grant funding that I had received, or my frequent flyer miles, from flying around everywhere for research meetings. And I started realizing that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough to live. That wasn't a big enough life to live, just simply publishing a lot of journal articles, especially if nobody accepted those and took them and disseminated them. So I started realizing, let me just make sure I'm understanding. Okay, good. So every once in a while I'll put on my glasses because I need to read a little message that comes in from somebody. It's really fun to read these. So it's something that you might want to consider too, which is the fact that we all die, first of all. And I know that's something that sounds strange for a speaker like myself to say, but we all die and we are here on this earth for a very finite time. And the real question is, what do we want to do with that time we spend? Do we want to spend it trying to build our own reputation as some academic researcher, or do we really want to make sure that that research means something, that there's a use for that? And for me, it was that latter thing that I wanted to do. I really wanted to reach people. So I built a business. And that, to most people around me, academics, was an insane thing to do, especially the idea of building a for-profit business out of a school of public health, because public health doesn't typically think about capitalist enterprises, especially in the 1980s and 1990s when I was considering this. But I did build a company. It was called Health Media, and I built this company in 1998, and it was just when the internet was taking off. And that company ended up growing to over 185 people. We ended up with computer-tailored, internet-based coaching. We called it digital health coaching. We ended up reaching over 55 million people in multiple countries, and we very effectively grew. Our programming really raised the bar for other kinds of internet health programs. And we sold the company to Johnson & Johnson it was for a sizable amount, I'll put it that way. And with that sale, we ended up reaching even more people, because Johnson & Johnson is the world's largest health company, and they're very effective at reaching out with a lot of people. And so I felt good about that. And we were continuing to work on health media until a sudden event in my own life occurred. My daughter, Julia, who was a heart transplant recipient, she caught a virus when she was 6 months old in 1990, and this virus attacked her heart. And typically, this is a chickenpox virus, and typically a virus like this just causes a fever and a rash for a few days. But this virus attacked her heart, and it completely destroyed her heart. And the only hope for her was a heart transplant. And I right away went to computer sources of data to learn more about if she received a new heart, what the chances are, first of all, of getting a new heart, and second, what her survival would be like, and third, what the quality of her life would be like, because we had to decide whether to even do a heart transplant, to list her for a transplant. And we decided that while the odds were against her long-term survival, we thought that she could live a good quality of life, and we decided to do that. That prompted me actually to start building health media, because I realized, boy, I can do this. At my fingertips are computers where I can learn more about how to make better health decisions about myself and my family. So we created health media. But then in 1990, she died. So she died when she was 19 years old, and it was very sudden, and she died of a heart attack. And when that happened, I kind of I grieved, of course, but I started getting very depressed. And I suppose depression is a very natural thing to have happen after you lose a loved one, especially a child. But as a behavioral scientist, I started realizing I'm getting so depressed and grief is taking over. I have to fix myself. Nobody else is going to fix me. I have to fix myself. And if I can't do it, then I'm really not worth my salt as a behavioral scientist. So I started reading a lot of books. I read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning. I read poetry by Rumi. I read Seneca's letters, who lived 2,000 years ago. I also, and all of these people spoke to a concept called purpose in life. They all said, you need to have a strong purpose in your life. And people may lose that purpose. And if they do, they'll become depressed. And you need to find new purpose in your life in that case. And so I started realizing that I was going through this loss of purpose in my life. And this was after she passed away. And I'm sorry, it wasn't in 1990. She was born in 1990. She actually died in 2010. So this is eight years ago she died. And when she did, I started realizing I had lost my purpose. And I thought the only way to get that back is to start thinking about what mattered most in my life. So I literally wrote the things that mattered most to me in my life. And that included the world. The world matters a lot to me. Love matters. Beauty matters. My wife matters. Our older daughter, Rachel, matters. My students matter to me. My work matters a great deal to me. So in writing about that, I started thinking, those are the things that matter most in my life. Now, let me attach a goal to those. For example, I started thinking, my students matter so much to me. I'm going to teach every one of my students as if they're my own daughter, Julia. So that completely changed my life. Rather than the University of Michigan had let me take off for a whole year if I wanted to, just to recuperate. And instead I called them and said, I would like to do the opposite of taking off. I want to jump back into teaching as soon as I possibly can. And so what I realized is that I was starting to rebuild my purpose from scratch and actually rebuild my life from scratch. And in doing that, I found myself with much more energy, much more vitality, because I had this big purpose. I had 200 students who were all my daughters. And that was like a big job to teach all of them. I also had so many other things going on in my life. I decided to write a book about my experience. I was asked to do a TED Talk about this experience. So I was working on various presentations about this experience in my life. And I started really realizing this is very helpful for me, this idea of having a strong purpose in my life. So I'm going to try to help other people build purpose in their lives. So one of my purposes, my global world purpose, is to help over 1 billion people find purpose in their lives. Because I personally think that the world is becoming increasingly nihilistic. Nihilism means the loss of purpose. And this could coincide with, loss of religion that some people have, moving more from, toward agnosticism or atheism. And I'm not going to weigh in on religion or not at this point. That's another topic to cover. But I do think that as people may lose their religion, they may often become purposeless or wander around in a purposeless way. And I didn't think you had to. I thought that whether you're religious or not religious, you could certainly develop a strong purpose in your life that's transcending, that goes above yourself. And I started thinking, I should do more research in this area. And so sure enough, we have been doing research in this area, as well as I started reading more about scientific research and people who have a purpose. And it turns out that people who have a strong purpose in their life, and all I mean by that is, as I said before, you start with what matters most in your life, and you start thinking about setting a goal around those things, or goals around what matters most in your life. I also thought about this headstone test. What would be on your headstone? What do you want to have on your headstone? What do you want people to say at your memorial service? That relates to your purpose. Do you want to be the richest person in the cemetery? Do you want to be the most attractive person in the cemetery? You realize how useless that is. So I started realizing how I need to stimulate this idea, this concept of a purpose in life, and help people build that up. So I thought, I build a lot of applications, a lot of digital applications. I built Health Media, which is a digital health coaching company. Maybe I should build a digital life coaching company. And I thought, well, this is interesting, because with Health Media, I had well over $20 million in NIH research showing that our data, that everything was working really well. with purpose in life, we know that people with a strong purpose 10 years later are half as likely to become depressed. People with a strong purpose in life are less likely to make hospital visits. They're less likely to have heart attacks, less likely to develop stroke. They live longer. They're happier. They even have better sex. They make more money over time. And this is statistically controlling for age and race and gender and income and education and health status. And even small manipulations of purpose seem to, especially self-transcending purpose, seems to help you. So whenever we ask people just to write down their purpose, it seems to have a positive impact on behaviors. It seems to reduce your ego wall, this defensiveness that people have. And I thought, I need to do this for other people. This would be my purpose in my life. So I created JOOL. JOOL Health is named after the nickname of my daughter, Julia. So we used to call her Jules. And so we created this company called JOOL. And I know there's an e-cigarette company now called JOOL, and that happened, they kind of surfaced after we had named our company JOOL, and that may be a problem, we don't know, but this company is really her legacy in many ways. So one of the things I was asked to talk about a bit is how you move a research concept into the real world. And, I found it difficult to move digital health coaching into the real world through traditional government sources, such as the Centers for Disease Control. It's the only reason I built a company. It was because I wanted to reach more people. And we ended up reaching, as I said, 55 million people. With JOOL, I'd actually like to reach over 1 billion people, because I think that people around the world need greater purpose, direction, meaning in their lives. And I think when you do, you build more energy. And you also, in building that, need to be aligned with your purpose every day. For example, to teach 200 students as if they're my own daughter requires that I take care of myself. It requires that I think about sleeping better, eating better, being more creative every day, being present and mindful, which for me is meditation. It means I need more energy. And so I started thinking about an application that might help people first find their purpose and then think about what makes them tick to make them more aligned with their purpose. And now this is a really, you might guess, is quite a far out idea for many people. And I thought, how am I going to sell this product? How am I going to position the product in the marketplace? And so we thought very carefully with some of my friends and colleagues, we thought, how would we send this out and reach really 1 billion people? And the way we decided to do this initially was to start where people spend most of their time, which is at work, their waking hours. Most people spend their waking hours at work. So let's try to license this application called JOOL to companies. And we could do it through kind of standard wellness programming, but I thought this goes well beyond broccoli and treadmills and standard wellness programming. This is more well-being. This is something much deeper than wellness. It's more at the substrate of this issue. So we really worked very hard to figure out whether companies would be interested in something like this. And it turns out they really are. So companies, it turns out, are really worried and concerned about engagement by their employees. Very often employees feel like their work is meaningless. Well, part of that means simply that they lack purpose in their work. So we thought maybe we could help people find greater purpose, not only in their general life and their personal purpose in life, but also at work. So that's often called job crafting. I'll give you an example of this. When we were in the hospital for long periods of time, months sometimes, with our daughter Julia, I noticed there was a custodian in the children's hospital at the University of Michigan who would read a children's book to a child who was dying of cancer. And this poor child never had parents come in. I never saw parents come in and see this child, even though the child was dying. This custodian took it upon himself, wasn't asked by anyone, but just would sit next to the child who was laying there very sick, and at night read a book, a children's book, every night to that child before she went to sleep. And I get emotional even thinking about this because that custodian had a very strong purpose. Other custodians that I would talk to, I love talking to everybody, didn't seem to have a purpose. They would work for the money, and they said it's not enough money and too hard to work, and they would take off as much time as possible. But this custodian felt like he was part of the medical team, and indeed he was. In fact, he was in many ways more special than the medical team. And so I thought, how do we give people that idea of purpose, that connectedness and meaning with any kind of job they had? So that's what JOOL does. It helps people find meaning and purpose in their work, at home, with their family, with their community, and then helps them figure out how to become more aligned with that effort. And so far, JOOL is still in its early stages. I've invested some of my own money in it, and then we've received money from friends and family and a little bit of venture capital money. But we've really been interested in maintaining some degree of autonomy and independence in our company, so we don't have outsiders kind of ruling where we're going. Because first of all, purpose in life is kind of a big existential ephemeral idea. How are we going to get major companies or major venture capitalists to invest in what we're doing unless we can prove what we're doing? And sure enough, now we're really proving that what we're doing has a very positive impact on companies' employees' engagement, in their performance, in their happiness. We're reducing depression levels. So we're seeing really positive impact from this kind of company. But it was a company where it was more a vision that I had that we really needed to find greater purpose. There is only minimal scientific evidence at the time we created the company. Now there's more and more scientific evidence. So we kind of hit the ground at a point where it was a little bit earlier than the research data were coming in, and now it is coming in. We also have found, and other business schools have found in 3 different studies, that companies that have a revenue transcending purpose actually do better. They make more money if they have a revenue transcending purpose. So think about this in almost a Zen-like way. If an individual has a self-transcending purpose, they're thinking about things bigger than themselves, other people, the world, love, compassion, community, gratitude, they end up doing better themselves. If companies have a revenue transcending purpose, if they're thinking about things bigger than themselves, their customers, their employees, the world, their communities that they work in, they end up making more revenue. And there's very good data supporting this. So I thought, what if we built this kind of transformational company using technology? And I'll close with this. The other part of, and I would call it a vector of innovation. So there are 2 vectors of innovation in what we do at JOOL. One vector is moving traditional ways of thinking about health, eat more broccoli and run on a treadmill for a while, to thinking more about your purpose in life and your and about self-transcending issues and helping other people, volunteerism, thinking about things that are bigger than yourself. The other vector is moving population health and an approach to just treating everybody as if they're average into what we call precision well-being. And this is where we're using apps, so a standard app that we've built. But in this app, we collect information about you. And based on your location, we can also look at things like the weather. We can look at whether it's raining outside or how cold it is or how humid it is or whether there's suddenly a change from it being rainy to being sunny. We can also look at, based on your location, what the gas prices are right there, to look at economic stability, for example. We can look at your zip code and notice and use the Centers for Disease Control data looking at depression rates in your zip code. We can look at health status rates and obesity rates and other factors, and we can put this into a predictive model. We can also look at things like the pollen count based on your location. We can look at whether you've been traveling. So when I go to San Francisco from Ann Arbor, Michigan, it knows that I've traveled a long way. It also knows I'm in San Francisco. It knows the temperature and the other aspects of the weather. It knows the pollen count. It can start reading other aspects based on my location. It also knows the day of the week and the day of the month and the time of the day. All of those things can be used to start giving me advice to have more energy every day, to have more self-control every day. If I want to work on anything impeding my purpose, Maybe I suffer from migraines. Maybe I have Tourette's syndrome. Maybe I have, you know, various illnesses or issues that might relate. Maybe I have a difficult relationship with my spouse or partner. Whatever those things are, I can start working on those, and it starts helping me figure out what makes me tick and gives me just the right help at the right time. Which is very special. So this is a program that uses machine learning language and artificial intelligence. And a lot of people throw that out, but it's using it very, very carefully. We spent a lot of time. Somebody just said, "We're losing you, Vic." So I want to make sure that we're not losing what I'm saying. Can you hear me okay? Oh, okay, you can hear me okay. So yeah, now I've started to talk about artificial intelligence, so maybe we're losing the content of this, but I want to emphasize two things. One is we're really focused on a concept of purpose in life, but we're also at the same time trying to use technology to become smarter about you, to help you. It's almost like a digital life coach. So with Health Media, we built a digital health coach. Now we're building a digital life coach. But now with all the technology we have available in our world, we can start using big data. We can use biometric data, so I can collect information from my smartwatch or from a Fitbit or Fuel Band, from my smartphone. We can start putting all of this into a predictive algorithm that starts helping you get the right help at the right time. That's the whole point. I've always thought that an ideal outcome, an ideal kind of product might be an angel that's sitting on your shoulder, that's whispering in your ear saying, "Vic, you might not want to do that." Or, "Vic, have you thought about doing this?" This kind of digital life coach, though, is similar to that concept of an angel on your shoulder that's helping you make decisions about your life, helping you think more about about existential issues. So this is a really big idea, obviously, and our company is really thinking very big in this way. And I guess I'll stop there, and I'm happy to answer questions. I will say this: JOOL is now doing extremely well. So we are, working with some really, really good customers. We're working with the American Association of Retired Persons, the AARP. We're working with United Healthcare. Steelcase is a customer. Dow is a customer. Stanford is a new customer, Stanford University. And so we're growing. Ford Motor Company is a customer. We're growing a great deal in terms of the number and types of customers that we're getting. And this concept is really resonating as well. I'll be doing a talk at the Silicon Valley Employers Forum in May to talk all about this concept of purpose, and can we use technology and link it with this existential idea of purpose to really help people change their lives in a much more fundamental way than other apps have done before. So I'll stop there, and I'm really happy to answer any questions that you might have. Happy to answer anything about any question that you want. Here's a question. Let's see. What is the relation? Let's see. I've got to open this up here. Here we go. What's the relationship between human advisors and recommendations? Is it purely an algorithm generation or hybrid? It is really algorithmically based. Now, this program, the product that we built, works really well with coaches, with life coaches or health coaches. You could give this application out to people and then interact with them in a much more efficient way. So we know that, and that's an effective way to do this. But also, people can use it on their own completely without any help. Let me try to answer any other questions here. Is JOOL all about apps, dashboards, AI data, etc., or is it more of a program which includes workshops? Oh, what a great question, Jay. Thank you. It really is an overall platform. It's a digital platform that we've created to help people. But I will say this, along with that, for various companies, I was just at Georgia Tech University yesterday, and I was speaking to about 200 students. And it was all about purpose. And they're now all starting to use, Georgia Tech is now starting to use JOOL. And so my talk was a keynote about the importance of having purpose in life. And we will probably run workshops there, and we certainly can. But this is primarily a technology platform. So let me go on here. This is huge. Oh, let's see. I want to make sure I'm not messing this up. Oops, somehow I got out of this program. I'm sorry here, I've got to find this again. And I have to press on the right button. Let's see, I'm having a hard time here finding the questions from people.
Vic, I can read some questions for you.
Oh, would that be okay? Thank you. That would be perfect.
Yeah. Great. Okay, so there is this question from Mark, and he's asking, can you talk about how to develop metrics that validate a company's solution?
Yeah, that's so interesting. And I'm so glad that you asked that question, because I know that was part of the subject matter to begin with. And I might have rambled off a little bit like professors often do, especially professors my age. Yeah, the kind of metrics, what's interesting is that researchers tend to have their own set of metrics. And very often those set of metrics are different than a customer's set of metrics. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that academic researchers and outsiders to the business world think about, it's a huge mistake actually, that we often think about metrics that will please our fellow academic researchers. And I'll just give you an example. If I'm a school district, I may be really interested in retaining students so that I get more tax money for every student who is at school. Whereas as an academic researcher of children, I might want to improve certain, other metrics that are completely different than that. If I'm a company, I might be very interested in retaining my best employees and attracting the best talent, especially given now the market in the United States, where the unemployment rate is very low and companies are really searching for talented employees and need to keep them. Whereas an academic researcher may be interested in very different metrics. So one of the things that academic researchers really have to think about very carefully is what is the pain in the marketplace? And in selecting a target market that they're going to go after, whether it's companies like corporations or whether it's schools or governments or whatever, they have to really understand what the pain is of that organization and then start collecting metrics around that, ideally building them into the product itself, if at all possible. I'll give an example. JOOL Health now, in addition to standard metrics of how aligned you are with your purpose in life, which may or may not have a tremendous influence on a buyer's decision of whether to get JOOL, we also look at things like performance and other metrics that are super relevant to that company. We can also connect through an API to Workday and other platforms, business platforms that may be monitoring things like absenteeism or other issues. And we can connect to other surveys that are connected to employees' engagement, for example. So being able to look at those issues it's paramount. It's really essential in a company. Now, the really hard part is if you're bootstrapping a company, if you're building it from scratch, how do you build the product so that it's good enough to actually have positive outcomes? And then how do you get enough of those positive outcomes so you can convince employers that this is worthwhile? I would say one of the answers to that, and maybe it's overly simple, is to try to run some pilots. So if you can run pilots, and not just run a pilot study with a company that is just going to throw this out to a couple of people willy-nilly, this application, but really construct a disciplined pilot that will have outcomes that are important to that customer. And if they're not important to the customer, you shouldn't do the pilot. It's a waste of your time. It should be very important to that customer and to other customers. Those data should be generalizable. And that's really a hard thing to do, obviously. I mean, I don't think I'm saying anything that everybody on this call doesn't know, but that is one of the toughest parts about a startup business, trying to understand, first of all, what the real pain points of that customer are, not your pain points, not what's interesting to you and your fellow researchers, but what's interesting to them. And then how do you build a product that's good enough to actually see some of those outcomes come out?
Were you able to find the questions, or do you want me to read another one?
Would you mind reading them? Because for some reason I
Okay.
lost the screen. Yeah.
Yeah, don't worry, it's perfect.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm going to read another one. What's the most difficult environment JOOL is operating on right now, and what's the experience been like? Say war-torn regions, high poverty zones, immigrants crisis, terminal illnesses, or similar. I ask myself a lot about boosting people's purpose here in Venezuela. Doing so while they deal with unlimited scarcity, it is a bit complex.
Yeah, I so understand. I've done a fair amount of work in sub-Saharan Africa in various countries like Zambia, doing a lot of AIDS prevention work in the 1980s and some other work in South Africa in the 1990s. And I've done work as well in Asia and a bit in South America as well. I've not been to Venezuela, and from my understanding, it sounds like things are extremely dire there, very, very difficult. I don't have a simple answer for you in terms of being able to set something up, that works right away in these countries. In a country like that, I'm afraid. I just don't have a great answer for you right now. Maybe if you want to elaborate on the question a little bit more, I'd be really happy to try to answer it a little better than that.
Okay. Vic, how do you take concepts whose primary purpose is to help people and sell the idea to customers, relating it to the bottom line?
So I'm trying to, I'm a little, these questions are coming in and the sound isn't perfect. Would you mind just restating the question again?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
How do you take concepts whose primary purpose is to help people and sell the idea to customers, relating it to their bottom line?
Right. Okay. That's a great question, and I think I actually can answer that, I hope. Well, many of these concepts that we're talking about, they do indeed help employees. You absolutely have to convince a buyer, a customer, that they'll also help them. So the bottom line now, there's a lot of data showing that employees who are more purposeful perform better. And they perform better at work, they're more engaged at work, they're less absent from work. And really, one of your jobs as an entrepreneur is to help collect data that demonstrates that from your product. One of the real challenges is that I found anyway, personally, you can show an employer and employers are our primary customer at the moment, you can show employers a lot of research data that demonstrates this, and they'll say something very likely to say, well, not in my company. My company is different. And I think you have to respect that. I think all companies indeed are different. All organizations are different. All schools are different. Government entities are different. They all have their own cultures and very often their own needs. So it's really important, if at all possible, to help try to demonstrate the effectiveness of your product in their environment. So, and then the other way to think about this is to work through pioneering organizations that other companies or other organizations listen to and watch and try to mimic. So I remember with Health Media, we got a contract from Kaiser Permanente, and Kaiser Permanente has 10 million members. It's a large health maintenance organization. And when we received a contract from them, and then they did some research and found that health media products really worked well for them, and then they published those data, then suddenly we had 20 companies interested in working with us because they were Kaiser Permanente was an opinion leading organization. So one option is to go to opinion leading customers in whatever domain you're in and try to convince that customer, that potential customer, that they should pilot your product. And maybe even do that for free and work with them closely and then use them as your salesperson. So ideally what you want are customers becoming your salespeople, not you being a salesperson. I'm not that good a salesperson. Salespeople aren't that good as salespeople. The best salespeople, in terms of just generally selling products, especially in this space that I'm talking about, the best salespeople are existing customers. And they're telling other customers, boy, you have to try JOOL. It is amazing. It really helped my employees. When you have that happen, then things change very rapidly. Can I ask you to go back to that question from Venezuela? If you could repeat it maybe a little more slowly, Paula, I'd really like to try to help answer that if possible. I'm not sure that I can, but I'd like to at least hear it again.
Okay, let me go back to that.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, or maybe Daniel, let me see if I can unmute him.
Or maybe, yeah, or a related question.
Okay, so let me read it, and after this, maybe we can let the people unmute themselves so they can ask it themselves.
Okay.
So this is the question. What's the most difficult environment JOOL is operating on right now, and what's the experience been like? Say war-torn regions, high poverty zones, immigrant crisis, terminal illnesses, or similar. I ask myself a lot about boosting people's purpose here in Venezuela. Doing so while they deal with unlimited scarcity, it's a bit complex.
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's a little, I understand the question a little more.
Great.
I only heard Venezuela at the end, and I thought, okay.
Yeah, great.
So one thing I've been playing around, we've been for the last 2 years trying JOOL out in many different settings just to see, wow, let's try it with very difficult settings. You can try it with easy settings, a high-tech company, for example. That's not so hard. But we decided to try this with foster care adolescents in Kentucky. Kentucky is a fairly poor state in the United States, and foster care children are children that do not have don't live with their biological parents. They either live in special homes or they have lived with other people who have adopted them. And they often move from one adopted parent to another adopted parent. And their lives are very often extremely difficult. Their use of healthcare resources once they become adults, once they become 21, are 4 to 5 times more than non-foster care adolescents turning adults. So a large healthcare company in Kentucky asked whether they could use JOOL for these foster care adolescents. Now, we don't know if this is going to help them. We don't know if it'll work, but we decided to work very closely with the adolescents themselves to collect language and tips, strategies they're using, and purposes they're creating in their own lives for themselves. And we're using that and embedding it into the application itself. And right now we're in the middle of pilot testing that to see whether it works. If it does work, the payoff would be tremendous, both for JOOL as well as for these foster care adolescents. I think one of the things that this question, which is a lovely question, points out is sometimes taking on a problem that seems impossible and just trying some things and continuing to pivot until you've got some type of solution, hopefully that is scalable, can really have a tremendous benefit. And other people very often are afraid to try to tackle that issue. So with JOOL, we thought this really should be very relevant to the poorest of the poor. In fact, when you look at refugees, for example, a friend of mine is a photojournalist, and he covers a lot of refugee issues, refugees coming from Syria, for example. And he said that people who are refugees and migrating to other countries simply want a purpose in their life. They want to find meaning and purpose in their lives and lead a purposeful life. That's the number one reason. So helping people find that, achieve some degree of purpose, you see how much purpose drives individuals. It drives them to the point of near death very often. So that's why we wanted to work with this population of foster care kids. We're also very interested actually in working in other countries as soon as JOOL builds out a little bit more. So after we work with employers, other populations that are potentially much more difficult, but to me much more interesting, would be our goal.
Okay, so I'm going to let the people raise their hand, and I'm going to unmute them so they can ask their questions by themselves. So if someone wants to ask their questions, please raise your hand and I'm going to unmute you. Let me check. Okay, in the meantime, I'm going to ask one. Do you think on aligning the purpose of any B2B company so that JOOL can accompany their growing and positive influence of their employees, such as sorting out their values aligned with their purpose, meaning creation?
Would you mind just repeating that one more time?
Yeah.
I think I got the question, but I want to make sure I do.
Okay. So did you think on aligning the purpose of any B2B company so that JOOL can accompany their growing and positive influence of their employees, such as sorting out their values aligned with their purpose, meaning creation?
Yeah, that's a beautiful question, and let me just restate it a bit and to make sure that at least I'm repeating the question. I hope it's the same. The question here is, can we align a company's purpose and values with employees' purpose and values? And very often they're different. So, I try to help employers think more about the purpose of their company. And obviously some companies just say it's to make as much revenue as possible as quickly as possible. Those companies actually don't do nearly as well in my experience, and some research really supports this, as companies who do have a revenue transcending purpose. Trying to understand what employees' core values are, what those core values are of individuals, especially founders, the people who are the early participants in a startup business, finding out what their values are and trying to connect that with the values and mission or purpose of the company really seems to benefit the company. Building an actual company mission, a company purpose, and really is helpful to employees so they feel aligned with that. If they don't feel aligned, then they probably don't belong in their company. I have a good friend, Ari Weinsweig, who created a company called Zingerman's. You can look up Zingerman's. It's a $55 million company now, but it started as a small delicatessen in Ann Arbor, but they are phenomenal, a phenomenally successful business. And I asked Ari, what happens when employees differ in their mission and purpose? Because Zingerman's has a very strong purpose. He said, well, we don't hire them in the first place. We only bring in employees who share this common mission and purpose with us. So we make sure they understand that mission, as part of the hiring process, and then we bring them in. And as a result, their service is amazing. So I really think trying to align the employees' mission and purpose with the company's mission and purpose is important. That's not to say employees can't have other purposes in their lives. They may have a family purpose, they have a community purpose, and that's great. And in fact, a good company wants to help balance those purposes. If everybody's just aligned with the company purpose and that's all they're doing, we call them workaholics. And that's not good either. Over time, they'll suffer from role conflict, they'll get burned out, and they'll leave the company in some way. Ideally, what you want to do is help people balance various purposes that they might have in their life so that they can get home after the end of a very busy day and still be very engaged with their family, for example, or be engaged with their community. I hope that's kind of answering the question.
Okay, so now I'm going to unmute Suresh Waran. So yeah, you're on mute, Suresh.
Okay. Hi. That's just kind of a personal question because the last 3 years or so, I've studied the concept of time and how it relates to the human mind and how we perceive it in our societies and as individuals. So I just
Wow.
wanted to ask, yeah, I just wanted to ask you, like, how do you value time?
How do I value time?
Mm-hmm.
That's such a weird, interesting question, I must say. And I'm really interested in it. So I'm going to try to ask you to unpack that a little bit. I can think of time in many ways.
Yeah.
I'll let you unpack it for a second first.
Yeah, and so it can go a lot of ways, and there's no technically wrong answer, but essentially how we value time consciously and subconsciously kind of influences how we make decisions and how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive other people. And so for me, I value time as equal to life, if not even more, just by definition of it being there longer.
Now, wait, you value time as what? I'm sorry.
As equal to either life or even possibly more, just by the logic of it being there longer and life taking place entirely within time as we can understand it. So I was just curious to hear your thoughts on it, because you spoke a lot about it indirectly, I think.
Let me riff on time just a little bit. I have been fascinated by the concept of time and our perception of time. Mm-hmm. It went all the way back to when I was sitting in church, in Lutheran church as a child, and listening to a minister drone on. And I felt like a 20-minute sermon felt like about a month. So every minute seemed to stretch out. So I used to try to figure out how to get through that sermon. And so I tried holding my breath. I knew I could hold my breath for a minute. So I'd hold my breath for a minute, and I thought maybe I can hold it 20 times and then he'll be finished. And of course that didn't quite work because I'd get tired, but I would try to do that. Then I would go through various fantasies that I had at 12 years old. And I realized I only had 3 fantasies, and I'd get tired of that. In other words, it was excruciating, and time felt like it was forever. Then I think about other activities, and you could think about, I think about when I'm giving a speech, or when I'm teaching, or when I'm fully engaged with somebody. Time contracts, and it feels like seconds. If I'm giving, I was at MIT last year, and I was invited to give a 3-minute pitch at some MIT competition for various companies, and we were finalists in this. And so I was excited about that. And I had, I think, 8 slides or something like that. And after 3 minutes, I only got through 3 of the 8 slides. And I'd rehearsed it before at least 20 times, and I got through it with no problem at all. But as soon as I got up there and I started getting into it, time completely changed. And I realized I was out of time and hadn't even come close to getting through this. In other words, when I'm fully engaged in something, or think about sex, or think about other times, time just moves in a different rate than when you're in a sermon, or listening to somebody drone on. I hope that this talk, for example, went quickly as opposed to felt like it was forever. If it went forever, then I've truly failed. So I guess that's one conception of time. Is that making sense?
Yeah.
Great. Hey, Vic, it's Nicole. How are you? I'm so glad that you're on here. So the next question that we have for you that I think is a really good question. One of the companies, since so many of these companies are speaking with corporations and also looking to become reimbursable, one of the questions from Andreas was, we've had conversations with insurers, and they say that we need to create a new code before they'll pay for solutions like ours. Can you talk about or point us in a direction? What are the best practices for working with an insurer to become reimbursable? Is there anything that we could do, or is it just be patient? What are the ways to accelerate that process? And What is the typical target role that they should be taking in working with the insurer?
You know, it's funny, the questions have been all over the board, haven't they? It's so cool, from time and relativity to how you get checked off on a box and reimbursed for it. The getting checked off and, you know, and having something reimbursed requires evidence, of course, and it requires evidence that convinces a large number of people that will say it's worth paying something for that particular effort. And so that requires, you know, I'm speaking in Boston tomorrow at Health Partners, which is a large healthcare organization. And, you know, if you're going to go into a large healthcare organization, a large insurer, or group like that, and you expect some sort of reimbursement for what you're doing, obviously it requires evidence, and that requires a trial, typically, like a randomized trial, ideally some published evidence. So, it's really hard to be able to answer your question specifically without knowing, you know, exactly what kind of product it is and what the issue is that you're trying to be reimbursed for. But my friend Dean Ornish spent literally 10 years or more trying to get his Ornish program reimbursable. And it really did take that long. When he did, it was reimbursed at a very, very high level. Like, I believe it was over $5,000 per person for reimbursement to go through the Ornish program. And then, you know, after that, all sorts of, you know, pretty amazing things happened for Dean and the Ornish program. Then they were bought by a company, a large company that was able to then scale the Ornish program out, which is very effective. But it literally did take a very long time. It took a couple of randomized trials using the Ornish program that then demonstrated effectiveness in physiological outcomes. And so obviously that is a very big hurdle for a startup company to engage in. It usually requires venture capital. It usually requires some pretty significant capital that's going to be dedicated to that effort. So you're dedicating to two efforts. One is to build the product up to make sure it's the best product possible. And then you're also dedicating money to trials, to the effort of research. One possible avenue there are the SBIR processes. If you're in the United States asking this question, the Small Business Initiative Research Grants and STTRs, Small Technology Transfer Grants, can be up to, I believe, $750,000. Maybe that's gone over $1 million now. Where you can get some fairly significant funding to go ahead and start testing your product out. But those tests are required before you could get that. Now, I'm guessing that answer is still way too vague for the person asking the question, and they probably know everything I've said so far. But, you know,
Well,
it really does depend a great deal on the product and the issue.
Right. Well, we've just have a couple of more minutes because we tend to be very strict with the time for this group. So one quick question about employees opting into JOOL. Have you seen any concern that they might have about revealing their purpose in a company-sponsored app in case their purpose doesn't actually align with staying in the company?
Yeah, that's a great question. In other words, would you want to suck up to the company thinking they're going to read your purpose and say, all I want is to increase the next quarter of revenue for my company. That's my purpose in life. In which case, A, you'd be lying, and, B, it wouldn't help anybody really. We don't get that all that much because we really do assure confidentiality, privacy, and security. We're not only HIPAA compliant, but we're high trust compliant. High trust goes well beyond HIPAA. And one of our collaborators is Booz Allen Hamilton, who creates military grade security and privacy. So we really wanted to make sure that we conveyed to any employee or anybody using our application that our data would not be sold or shared at that individual personal level with anybody, including their employer or any sort of sponsor. We're not an ad revenue, an ad-based eyeball company, for example. But that being said, certainly there are people who won't believe us, and they won't use the app, and we won't force them to. So we also wanted to create an application that we didn't have to incent people by paying them to take. I've always felt there's some strange aspect to a product you have to pay people to take, because as soon as you pay people, they wonder whether the product is for them or for you. And we really are hoping to help other people with this. And quite honestly, we've been able to convince employers and health plans and insurers, other groups, that this is indeed helpful to people, and that in helping those people, it will help with their bottom line. Right.
Okay, cool. And so in the very last moments before we sign off, everyone, you are a researcher, entrepreneur. You've done this before to great success, and you're doing it again. What are the words, or what would you like to say to an audience of people who aspire to do the same thing? Everyone here is either an entrepreneur or an innovator who is seeking to build a product similar. Any last words of encouragement that you might have for this community?
First of all, way to go. It's so great to see this new generation of people saying, I'm not just going to build something and hope people take it forward, or some other group or some corporation takes it. It's great that you want to build something. It takes tremendous courage to do that. Edward Degas, the famous French painter, said, a painter paints a painting in the way that a criminal commits a crime. What he's saying is that to innovate, to create, to do something new means that you're leaving the status quo. And that means people may ridicule you. They may say it's not going to work. And you have to have the courage to say, I actually believe this is going to work. And I believe it so much that I'm devoting my life to this now. I think this concept of having purpose, and, obviously that's a little bit out there, and having, that belief, it's very important. And then you find people who are willing to follow you because they believe you too, and they're willing to go over that hill with you. There's something very special about that. And there's a special feeling I get from the people who work with me. And I have a great energy when I do that. So I love doing that, and I just want to congratulate all of you for doing that. The second and final thing is, I've discovered over the years of being an entrepreneur that the more interested you are in simply making money, and you really have to ask yourself this authentic question, am I really in this just so I can potentially become rich? I have found that almost none of those people become successful. If you continue to focus instead on your customers' needs, on the people who you are trying to work for and their needs, you are so much more likely to become successful. And I'll stop there. And thank you very much for taking time out of your valuable day. Thank you so much,
Vic. We so appreciate you. Everyone, the next session is going to be tomorrow morning with Kirk Souter, and it's a marketing session on how do you create movements around the work that you do and the products that you're making. So don't miss that session. Everybody, thank you so much. Vic, thank you so much. And looking forward to seeing you at the conference too.
Thank you. Take care.
Okay. Bye, everybody.
See you.